Yo guys, next up on the calendar and next to receive our car setup treatment is Jeddah. Now this is a fast and frantic circuit where corners just don't seem to stop coming at you. In F123, Jeddah is particularly tricky due to its high reliance on a low drag setup for the long straights and sheer mechanical grip and downforce through the fast and furious corners. This car setup is hugely successful and results in an absolute rocket ship of a car. So if you enjoy this setup or if you liked our Bahrain car setup, let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to be the first to see when we drop a new F123 car setup video. Now, jumping into the setup itself, as I mentioned, this car setup results in a car that is mightily fast around the entire Jeddah circuit. I've opted for a relatively low downforce approach, and this results in being able to easily keep up with and simply drive past the AI along the straights. I've gone for a higher front wing aero setup compared to the rear at 22, and this is designed to help the front of the car generate the downforce needed to be able to throw your car into the fast corners. The rear wing aero is set to 20, which ensures that the rear of the car can keep up with the front, and it makes sure that it sticks to the road through the fast direction changes and crucially when accelerating hard out of turn 13. For the differential, I've kept things low, which just ensures that the rear traction isn't an issue. With a relatively low rear aero setup, you could run into a few issues finding traction if you do run your on-throttle diff too high, so I've opted for the lowest of low setup choices and gone with an on-throttle diff setup of just 50%. Then to promote front turning, particularly through the slower corners such as turn 1 and turn 27, I set the off-throttle diff to 53%. The suspension geometry can be set to our usual approach of almost far right on the camber and almost far left on the toe. I've set the front camber to -2.5 and the rear camber to -1.1. Then I've gone and set the front toe to 0.01 and the rear toe to 0.13. Tyre wear isn't too much of an issue with this setup, even when I tested it in a full distance race, so you could even be a little bit more aggressive on the geometry setup if you do prefer. Now the trend with F123 car setup seems to be a stiffer front and softer rear suspension. This gives good responsiveness while ensuring the rear of the car remains compliant. While our last car setup at Bahrain softened everything right down, I've actually kept the front of the car pretty stiff this time round. The curbs around Jeddah can be a little harsh, especially the curb after turn 10, so if you do struggle a little bit over the curbs during a race, feel free to soften the front of the car a little bit more. It will just sacrifice a little bit of responsiveness. I've opted for a front suspension of 29 and a rear setup of 6. Then go for front anti-roll bars set to 14 and rear right down at just 2. Then for the ride height, I've opted for a front ride height setup of 35, while the rear remains at 39. Now I really like how brakes feel in F123, with the sensation of rear locking being much more realistic. Not running brake bias at 50% really satisfies my inner desire for a realistic F1 sim. For this setup, and for almost all of my F123 car setups, I'm running the brake pressure at 100%, and I've gone for a brake bias of 56%, which seems to be around the sweet spot this year. The last part of our Saudi Arabian car setup are the tyre pressures. I've set the front pressures higher than the rear to enable a bit more initial responsiveness. Go for 22.9 psi on the front right and 23 on the front left. Then for the rear pressures, set them to 20.3 psi on the rear right and 20.5 on the rear left. The offset between left and right tyres is designed to preserve the side of the car that takes the most punishment, which around Jeddah is both of the tyres on the right hand side of the car. And that will complete our F123 Jeddah car setup. I am really happy with how this car setup turned out, as during tested I could absolutely blast past the AI and had to actually increase my AI difficulty up compared to other tracks I've raced at. This setup's pretty aggressive with a heavy emphasis on straight line performance, but during a long race you won't suffer with tyre overheating, partially thanks to the cooler temperatures at night. Let me know your thoughts on this car setup in the comments below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this year's F1 game so far. Are you enjoying it? I'll be dropping at least one car setup every day moving forward, so subscribe to our channel if you want to be one of the first to see the videos when they do drop. But for now guys, enjoy this F123 Jeddah car setup and I'll see you on track.